As we get into another conversation for this hour, we're going to be looking at the effects of the USAID withdrawal on refugee support in Kenya. And our next guest is already seated on the hot seat, and that is John Burugu, who is the Commissioner for Refugee Affairs, and he is already here with us this morning. Good morning, John.
Morning to you.
Karibu sana.
Thank you.
You're in the hot seat of the Situation Room, and we're dealing with a hot topic nonetheless. When we look at certain things, we'll look at the details of that just a minute. But let's welcome you and get you to sit in the seat and relax, because CT has gone to a different African country this week. He has the proverb for us today, and he's going to tell you what that is, and then we're going to ask you to give us your interpretation of the proverb. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay.
We are in the Republic of the Sudan, okay? The Sudan is part of the geopolitical region within the African continent that we refer to as the Coup Belt. Countries whose existence since independence have been characterized by one coup after another, Sudan has had their fair share. They're doing quite well, actually. In terms of coups, they've had 7 since their independence in 1958. So, not a good thing, because it creates immense humanitarian problems, and it is suffering and untold and unwanted hardships. The proverb: empty stomachs have no roots. Burugu, what do you think this proverb means? Empty stomachs have no roots.
I would not be able to interpret that, I think.
You can tell us what you think about it.
Yes, maybe it's food for thought. Something that I would need to think about. Because Mr. Muga has...
No, surely. You know, let me tell you one of the things about these proverbs that make them very easy. It is that you can't interpret it wrongly. And the reason is because we're asking your opinion. These things mean so many things to so many people. It is not possible. It isn't one of these Kenyan exams where you have to get it right. Everything you say will be right, because that will be how you look at it. Yes.
Of course, different perspectives.
Yes.
You say... no roads.
Yes.
So, where there is no road, then you would not be able to get to a destination.
Roots. Empty stomachs have no roots. Roots. Nzizi.
Roots. Empty stomachs have no roots.
Yes.
I would say that the stomach keeps asking.
The stomach keeps asking. You see?
You knew.
You were right there.
You are spot on. The stomach never stops asking.
Yeah.
Never. Yes.
It never stops asking, and neither do those who are in a position of need, isn't it?
True.
And that forms the basis for a conversation that we'll have this morning. Since the 20th of January, the world essentially has been reeling from the effects of certain pronouncements that were made by the President of the United States. And that was as concerns aid that, development programs that would essentially either come to a halt or would be severely impacted by the reduction of these much needed funds in different areas. And the area of refugees does not fall out of this. It is right there. And, as the Commissioner for Refugee Affairs, we're looking at Kenya as a host nation for quite a number of refugees. I believe it is second after Ethiopia on the continent, second after Ethiopia. And so hundreds of thousands of people been through the refugee program over the last 20 to 30 years, whether we're looking at those that were taken in from Central Africa, whether we're looking at those who were taken in from the Horn, wherever there was a conflict, even outside of the region, Kenya has played host. Now, this has been funded by a lot of dollars that come from outside the region, outside of Africa. So what threat, essentially, does the reduction of this funding then pose towards the status of care for refugees in Kenya? That's the conversation that we'll be having today. And let's go into that. First of all, did it hit when the announcement was made, and how?
Of course, the announcement hit us unexpectedly, because we have hosted refugees since independence. And if you allow, when we got independence, we had about 20,000 refugees. And then they had what we call free movement. Over time, in the early 80s, we continued to get influx, especially after 1971, Idi Amin and such, more Ugandans, mainly professionals. Some were doctors, others were teachers. And then the numbers grew, and we had 13 small camps: Utange, Jomvu, Thika, Garissa, Kakuma. And in 1990, when Said Barre government fell in Somalia, then the influx would be about 200 in a day, in a week. And that influx necessitated the government to invite the United Nations High Commission for Refugees to support in the emergency response, together with the International Red Cross and the other agencies. And the government also resolved to merge or to locate the camps in Dadaab and also Kakuma and merge the 13. So the current existing refugee camps were gazetted then in 1990. And from there, the numbers have been growing. Today, we have 836,907 registered refugees and asylum seekers, mainly from East Africa, Horn of Africa, and the Great Lakes region. And we also have refugees from as far as Afghanistan. The distribution is 423,000 in Dadaab and 302 in Kakuma, 302,000, and 110,000 in the refugee, in the urban areas, mainly 60% in Nairobi, Nakuru, Eldoret, Mombasa.
How many did you say are in Dadaab, sorry?
Dadaab, 423,000.
423, okay.
Yes, and 302 in Kakuma.
In Kakuma, right.
Of that population, 475,000 are from Somalia, constituting 56% of the refugee population in the country. And 196,000 are South Sudanese. Traditionally, we have been supported by United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR. World Food Program provides a humanitarian assistance, the monthly token, the minimum basket per family. And other agencies like UNICEF provide child care, child medication, education support. International Refugee Committee provides, as an implementing agency of USAID, provides medical attention. And therefore, I would say that the support that we get from USAID is mainly in the medical area. They run and have set up a whole level 4 hospital. It is in Kakuma. And that hospital is funded in terms of the medical personnel, pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical by USAID.
Okay.
Through the support by the implementing agency, that is IRC, International Refugee Committee. International Refugee Committee, with the announcement, has laid off 100 staff. What does that mean? It means that refugee access to our 19 health facilities in the 2 camps of Dadaab and Kakuma will be affected substantially because the medical personnel have now to be provided by the government, which the government preparedness is not there. And of course, you already see the challenges that are there with our medical personnel across the board. So that is compounding the challenge and access of medical staff. Lactating mothers will not get attention. Prenatal and postnatal all those issues in relation to the refugees and the host community will be affected, because such a big facility was accessible and enjoyed by the host as well as the refugees. And so that is a challenge that we have in terms of direct, that is medical.
Right. Does it stop immediately? Or are we saying that it's a today you wake up tomorrow situation where lactating mothers will not get the nourishment that they need, whereby you will not be able to see that medical care is given to those who might walk into a camp facility? Is it immediate?
It is immediate. As we speak, we are grappling on how do we bridge the gap? How do we manage the situation? Because what has been reviewed is only and given a waiver is only UNHCR continued support on protection, resettlement, and advocacy on the aspect of the refugee registration and documentation. The aspect of USAID, they are supposed to focus on life-saving issues, not those ones which are off their mandate. And therefore, humanitarian, again, World Food Program has also been affected. It's not funded through USAID. Let me say that...
the World Food Program is a UN agency, is it not?
It is a UN agency.
Yes.
And let me paint the picture about the dire straits that we have in terms of the humanitarian assistance and the changing humanitarian landscape globally. In 2023, World Food Program was providing 60% minimum basket, meaning the nutrition, the token was available up to 60%. 2024, it came down to 45%.
Okay.
2025, we are at 40%. And we are told by the World Food Program it is up to June.
Allow me to understand what this token is on a monthly. What does this token entail?
That is a minimum food basket that one should be able to access.
Okay.
That provides for the family.
Okay.
And it looks at the vulnerability per family. How vulnerable is the family? And previously, it has been blanket, meaning that everybody was getting an equal basket. However, we are working on a framework which we call differentiated assistance.
Yeah.
But let me go back first to the percentages.
Yes.
So from June, it is expected to dip beyond 20%. Meaning that you keep removing from the minimum basket items.
Okay.
More so nutrition.
Right.
And the mothers that are now maybe pregnant, expectant, and the children, therefore, we are looking at a spike in malnutrition.
So let me I'm sorry to have, because I think this is really important, that when we talk about the reduction in the percentage of the token, we're not saying that there's a reduction in how many people get it. What we are saying is that there's a reduction in what is in the thing. So if you were previously getting, a ration of maize meal, and if you got dehydrated milk, or if you got, other cereals, we're saying that now maybe if you got a 1 kg packet, it's reduced to 500 grams. If you got milk, maybe now that's removed and you get soya, for example.
It's a quantity that is reduced.
The quantity of everything in the token that has been reduced.
And when the quantity reduces, it also reduces in terms of products. And those products also affect the dietary needs of the beneficiaries, meaning that if you have a family that requires milk and the milk is reduced, it means that it will be very hard hit, because you have nowhere else to go and look for milk. And therefore, those nutritional needs will be affected, overall affecting the health of the family.
Yeah. So, John, as you talk about the effect of the cut from USAID, now how that is affecting your operations, there is now the aspect of the fact that refugees are under international laws, and as those that are seeking asylum here and whatnot are here rightfully under the international law. And here is the government of the day, the government of Kenya, has the responsibility to shoulder these because they are in their territory. But the government of the day would say, we do not have the muscle to extend this support because we have our own people to think about. Now, is it then the government of Kenya having these discussions in order to be able to get further assistance to be able to run their affairs? Is that conversation ongoing?
There's what we call shared responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
The unsustainability of managing refugees started way back in 2016 when the UNHCR took a resolution to the General Assembly. And then the New York Declaration was made where countries were called upon to look for innovative and sustainable ways of managing their refugees.
Mm-hmm.
That was followed by what we call the Global Compact on Refugees. What measures, what aspects of sustainability and strategies would you have as a country? Because globally, yes, the UN Convention obligates a host country and a signatory to the UN Convention of 1951 to be able to receive, protect, and of course give access to services and support them. And that has been ongoing. But globally, there has been that reality of the unsustainability of a humanitarian approach. And subsequent to that, the principle of shared responsibility, Global Compact on Refugees, where the international community steps in to support the host country. Kenya has done its international obligation, welcoming, receiving, protecting. Of course, we have invested quite a lot of substantial resources in terms of protecting the camps. The host community have also donated community land in Garissa and well as in Turkana. And a lot of other Kenyans bear a lot of support. Let me put it to you that even when we talk about IRC and USAID support in the medical area, Kenyan government, through the normal allocation, gives support. Ministry of Education, again, gives support in terms of access to education. And we run what we call a LIM scholarship that supports the refugees. So the taxpayer of Kenya already is bearing a cost. Not to speak about the aspect of the security.
Security, yes.
So the government has already borne its responsibility. Open its doors, what we call open door policy. And again, we now have set up camps. And it's for those who are able to work, they are living within the urban areas. We have provided them with a movement pass to stay and change of address from the camp to the urban area. But that is just 110,000. All others are in the camp. And let me say this, there are three durable solutions. What we call durable solutions is a sustainability avenues that a refugee may be supported. One is a third country resettlement, where we get quotas. America, Canada, Austria, Norway, Netherlands, and all. I would say since 2013, 98,000 are the ones who have migrated to and resettled to Austria and other countries. And let me also paint this picture. In 2016, when President Obama was leaving, Kenya was getting an annual quota of 5,000 refugees to be settled in America. When Trump came in, president, by the time he left in 2020, we were down to 800.
Okay.
Meaning a reduction. That was a serious scale down. Right now, 2025 is a no. Flights have been cancelled. And therefore, it means that the resettlement aperture has closed. When America has coughed, Europe has got the fever. And therefore, they are also rethinking. And they are closing their borders. You have seen Germany have won elections because close our borders, no more refugees.
It's the nationalist wave.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So, it is incumbent in the country to think, is this sustainable to host? Yes, you have the international obligation, but you have also a national obligation, which is primary to your citizens.
So what was taken into consideration when you look at 1951, the UN Convention on Refugees and all of that? So when countries come and have a global conversation, and essentially there are certain parts of international humanitarian law that requires certain things that come into place, you ratify certain things.
Yes, we do.
Ratification means we're going to go ahead with this. That means that there is a national responsibility that comes up with taking up some of these things. Park that. Number two, depending on aid also gives you the notion that at some time it will come to an end. By virtue of the fact that you have different leaders who come into positions means that somebody, means that somebody could wake up one morning and decide, well, we're not going to do this anymore. And that will bear heavily on then the responsibilities, like what we see of 836,000 people who are, almost 1 million people in the country who need help. So my mind is trying. Then we have the Refugee Act of 2021 that was passed in Kenya's parliament with no pressure from anybody outside, which meant that Kenya was going to support, Kenya was going to provide for, Kenya was going to secure the livelihoods of refugees in the country. So understanding that, number one, aid could come to an end and that there are these almost 1 million people living in the country, I'm curious as to what was the plan, knowing full well how nations operate.
First and foremost, Kenya is a member of the Group of Nations.
Yes.
It's obligated by being a signatory to UN Convention of 1951. And further, it's the 1967 protocol. It's also a signatory to the OAU Convention of 1969 with specific aspects to problems of refugees in Africa. Kenya is also further a member of IGAD. And in 2017, we had the IGAD declarations, one in Mombasa on medical, refugees to be accessing medical and how member countries would be able to facilitate that. On education, the IGAD declaration was done by heads of state in Djibouti. On jobs and livelihoods, it was done in Kampala. And in Nairobi, we had the Somali registration and reintegration of refugees into Somalia. And with that, together with the Refugee Act of number 10 of 2021,
Yes.
we have the legal framework policies and regional body declarations that support refugee hosting by the Kenyan government. But the unpreparedness of our country in terms of the long-term support. What is the strategy of the refugee hosting? The government has been rethinking, and in 2022, we started what was called Marshall Plan, which we have christened into Shirika Plan. Shirika Plan is a blueprint by government to progressively integrate the refugees with the host communities, socio-economic integration.
Right.
And that is where now the crux of the matter is. Why? Because the Kenyans are very skeptical. You have heard the narrative about registering refugees and giving them IDs and all that. Refugees today, under legal notice number 143 of 2023, September, the Cabinet Secretary gazetted 6 refugee identification documents. The asylum seeker's pass, proof of registration, the letter of recognition, movement pass, refugee ID, and what we call conventional travel document, which is a refugee passport. So those are the 6 refugee identification documents. And further to that, Shirika Plan first is supposed to come and include the refugees into the productivity of the country, opening the frameworks that support them to move from the camps to integrated settlements. There are 6 programs that are running as interventions to support the sustainability of refugees and the transformation of refugee hosting areas to commercial hubs. One is Kenya Primary Early Learning Program, which started in 2022 with a $60 million support or grant by World Bank, looking at addressing the unequal education outcomes of these regions. Supporting expansion of schools, we have 49 camp-based schools.
Okay.
And accreditation of teachers, provision of hot meals, sanitary towels to the girls, that is education. and offering scholarships. And last year, we offered 8,000 scholarships to refugee children and host community, and they are spread across our national schools. We have Kenya Urban Support Program 2. That is where the Dadaab and Kakuma have become municipalities.
Okay.
And their infrastructure of their amenities would be upgraded to a municipal status.
Yeah, and as we talk about results of the funding cuts, let's just look at what Kenya has tried to do previously. We go back to April 2021 when Kenya issued a 14-day ultimatum to NHCR to develop a plan for closing Dadaab, and then the court ruled against that. Now, 2021 UN High Commissioner Filippo Grandi assured that Kenya was not closing the camps but was looking at ways to make it sustainable. But in May 2023, Kenya initiated plans to transition Dadaab and Kakuma from traditional refugee camps to integrated. But now, as we talk about all these movements that are happening, it is happening at a time when the country itself does not have enough resources to take care of its own. And when we talk about integrating refugees into the republic, into the community, there is the question of how about us, the locals. But even as we talk about that, there are international laws that Kenya is a signatory to. You say that Kenya is a global of countries, and so is the United States of America. One would beg to ask if America can decide to go against the global agreements, why should Kenya respect the same and just close the refugees and say kila mtu arudi kwao?
I think it calls for the rethink by the top executive of the country. The national interest. America is pursuing its national interest, inward looking, with the primary responsibility to its citizens, building its economy, securing its borders and all that. I'm not saying that Kenya is not doing that, but it is time. I would agree that it is the stoppage is what we call a wake-up call. The wake-up call for us to rethink how Kenya is going to sustainably manage the refugees in the country.
Yes.
One of the aspects, even when we are implementing shika plan, that is going to do socio-economic inclusion, we are looking in between there also about the aspect of giving labor access, providing work permits to the refugees, ensuring that they operate within our business laws and frameworks, that those who are enterprising are able to make a living that way and make a contribution. Move away from folding hands into active contribution to the country. But overall, the country leadership must rethink, because even if for example, taking it that we will implement shika plan and it's successful progressively, where is the cut line? You look at the situation currently in Sudan and the knock-on effect to South Sudan. South Sudan is currently hosting 1 million refugees from Sudan. And that knock-on effect comes to Kakuma. Look at DR Congo. There is 800,000 refugees currently in Burundi. They are not able to feel comfortable to get into Rwanda and Uganda. So they are looking for ways through Tanzania or others to come to Nairobi, to come to Kenya. Therefore, these 800 we are talking about, maybe by the close of the year will be 1 million plus. We are 5th in Africa and 13th globally hosting refugees. The country needs to rethink the long term. For the immediate, we'll grapple with how to manage the refugee humanitarian stoppage. We will, in immediate term, implement shika plan with the political goodwill of the host political leaderships. But there is that question by the bigger population, 51 million Kenyans. What about us? Why are you prioritizing refugees? That is for the government to answer. And the top leadership, therefore, must strategically think about the risks, the benefits. Of course, the refugees have capacity, they have potential, they have competencies that we can tap as a country. But how, for how long? If other countries are rethinking their international obligation, We have had reforms about African Union. We have had reforms about UN system. Why are we not having reforms in the refugee area? So that then countries, member countries and refugee hosting countries obligated under UN convention can be able to voice the concerns, the burden, and see how the international community is stepping in. Because what we have today is that the global north is looking at containment. Keep your refugees where they are.
Yes.
Let them not come to us. So for us as a region, initially we had that IGAD approach, looking at sustainability of the refugees within the region. The East African community, some of the countries have not ratified whatever they agree with. I'll give you an example. When they talked about free movement of East Africans and using an ID, and I've used it to go to Uganda. Only Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya have implemented and allow that practice, that an East African can go within a temporary pass of an ID. But other member countries have said no. Let them use a passport. So we have issues even within our bloc. So as a country, we must rethink what is our strategic objective of continued international obligation, regional obligation, and yes, we care for the humanity. But it is also important to know that you have other humanity who are your citizens, the primary objective, obligation.
Yes.
And therefore, the services, yes, that we are talking about in the 6 programs that World Bank is supporting, are for the host and host as well as the refugee. Window for host and refugee, that is Turkana and Garissa. But it takes more than that. The burden on security is serious. You know, the 2015, where that closure you are talking about, it was occasioned by the Garissa University attack.
Yes.
And the traceback was to the radicalization and the Al-Shabaab elements within the camp. That is why Kabios and IFO camps were closed that time. And that was a tripartite between UNHCR, Somalia and Kenya to repatriate. Midstream, that was stopped because of diplomatic engagements. And true to it, let's say that Kenya is a stabilizer in the region. Stabilizer by receiving the forcefully displaced populations. But for how long? And the refugees that we host today, we look at them from the security prism. Because they are pushed to us through the protracted conflict situation the region finds itself. So if our country is not properly structured in terms of the long-term management of refugees, our country can also be affected. And if it is affected, so where are we going to get the refuge? So it is incumbent in the top executive of the country to relook this, get a balance between the international obligation and the national obligation.
But this is the not a tomorrow problem, that this is an unfolding today, every minute need problem today. That the funding didn't say, I'm going to wait for other countries to get their, their act together, and then I'm going to cut the funding. No. They said, we are done today. Now, as is their right, they're not taking into consideration and all the many things that fall as a result of that. But I'm stuck on this 836,907 that we talk about today.
And counting.
Who need help today? Who need these interventions today? Who've been depending on these rations? Maybe some of them got their monthly ration last month and a little bit of that is still left. But then what happens when the month is up? What happens to medical? What happens to the things that funding was taken care of that is no longer being taken care of today?
I must appreciate Minister, our Cabinet Secretary, Honorable Malcolm, because when he came in barely 3 months ago, we have held about 4 meetings. First, we met the humanitarian support organizations, World Food Program, UNHCR, WFP, as well as UNICEF, to look at the humanitarian situation in the country. How is it? Without stoppage, how much are we affected? And that is a dire situation, that picture that was painted by WFP in terms of the reduction dipping to 20% by June. And yes, there has been some communication. again from America that yes, the sustainability of 40% would go to December, but that is only a 6 months increase.
Yes.
As you mentioned, the concern would be how do we bridge the immediate, the medium term as well as the long term, because this is not a problem that is not going away, and it is important that we structure ourselves as government. This is already at the desk of the cabinet secretary. He is aware about the situation. In terms of the Shirika plan, again, we had a meeting of consultations of the organizations that want to support various aspects or sectors, whether it is water, whether it is health, whether it is education, environment and all. And we have International Labour Organization and all these other organizations to see how best this intervention can be rolled out, because it is important that we have a sustainable way of managing refugees and hosting them here. They cannot be kept in the camp when they are hungry. We have had protests. I hope that you have seen that in Kakuma we have had a week of protests.
Yeah.
And that is just a tip of the iceberg. So after June, it will be very serious for us.
I mean, when you talk about refugees in this country, I want you to extrapolate it further, because we've seen that even in East Africa, we are not even united when it comes to the movement of people. But let's go to the African Union. And the African Union in 1969 passed a convention that would see how they would handle these issues. But if you go further on some of the challenges that we have, it is funding shortages and political goodwill in addressing these issues, which goes back to the question of, we have this problem as Africans. Why are we not coming together in finding solutions to our problems and have to depend on USAID to be able to sort this out? Why is it so difficult, you as a stakeholder, for African governments to intentionally put aside funds that would bridge this gap and help the people in the continent?
Various African governments have different approaches to refugee management, despite them having been a signatory to the OAU Convention of 1969, and that convention is worded that it is supposed to address specific problems affecting refugees in Africa. And therefore, it means, that when countries adopt different approaches, they lack a common way of resolving the issues of refugees. In West Africa, there is free movement of refugees, settlement from Senegal to Ghana. You check East Africa, it is different. You go to SADC countries, it is different. So it's like Africa is managing refugee in terms of blocks. The IGAD member countries I mentioned, the 8 of them made those IGAD declaration, the 4 IGAD declarations in 2017, which means anybody who is out of IGAD bloc would not again benefit from these declarations. It means that African Union, and I would say that African Union, maybe it is, of course, it is beyond me in terms of addressing the African Union, but it has not been forthright in terms of addressing. It has not been strategic in terms of addressing and the management of refugees. Like now, even with the stoppage, they have left every country to grapple with the challenges. There has not been a continental approach to the principle that America is obligated, like Kenya is obligated, like other African countries hosting refugees, and therefore the principle of shared responsibility, where we share the burden. I host them and you feed them. You support the other services and I support the security and the hosting and documentation.
And education.
So that shared responsibility principle has been neutered by American approach, but the African Union is quiet. So those are issues that obviously heads of state should be able to address. And back home, it is for us again as a top executive of the country to look at how best can they manage the 836 refugees, because the stoppage is not going to go away. It may temporarily be lifted.
Yeah.
But does that prepare the country? So there is need for country preparedness as in the management, overall management of the refugees, so that then they do not present a situation where they are competing for jobs with the Kenyans. The Kenyans feel that they are defranchised in one way or the other, and the priority is given to the refugees. We must balance the national obligation against the international one, and pursue the national interest and national security.
You know, it is strange. If you look at our continent, every corner you turn, there's some form of turmoil taking place.
Yes.
And it contributes to this discussion that we're having now, because the citizens then leave. So when it comes to even assisting, if you have a government that is fighting for survival, because it's under siege from its own citizens, because it's an internal conflict. And that internal conflict has a ripple effect of displacing its citizenry. Even when they have relative peace, one doesn't get the impression that this idea of actually ensuring that there's peace in the country, because if they were at peace, there would be no issue of refugees.
Refugees, yes.
Exactly. So cause, consequences, effect. So as a country, we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place, clearly. Because we're doing what we can, what is humanly possible, but in the absence of help, because
it becomes impossible.
Yes, because we are having difficulties just meeting the obligations of the citizenry of the country. Now, if you give us an additional burden, in the absence of that help, how then is it possible?
I think that is where now the call to leadership, where the balance must be struck. And the international obligation is not something that should cast the country into a situation where it cannot be able to take its position. You are obligated internationally, but the primary is the country. And we have strained in the resources of education, health, transport, environment, addressing our core issues, agriculture, food sustainability. And therefore, if we are still grappling with those ones, when we also now step forward in terms of the international obligation, sobriety is called upon.
Absolutely. I mean, is it not that national interest that has put this situation where it is? Because one country took up its national interest vis-a-vis what the rest of the world was expecting it to do. The United States said, hang on, no, we're going to look inward for some time and we're going to figure out what we're doing. And because of that, these funding cuts will come. Very simple. Whether you want to abuse them and tell them that they have a tyrant president, that is your problem. They've decided, look, this is what we are going to do. Now, you would probably become persona non grata of the world if Kenya said, okay, we cannot do this anymore. Now, nobody's advocating for that, but I hear what you're saying in the sense that perhaps Kenya needs to look insular and say, you know what, can we actually handle this? Can we handle this without this support? And if we're not getting the support from here, is there somewhere else we can get it? That what was the plan in the very beginning? And if we're not able to follow that plan, is it time that this wave that is hitting the rest of the world hits Kenya as well?
Let us look at refugee. Refugee is a temporary. Refugee response was an emergency response.
Yes.
It is no longer an emergency. 35 years down the line hosting refugees.
There are people who have grown up in the camps. There
Precisely.
are people who've come to the camp as babies, have been through an education system, have gotten married in the camp and left the camp at 40 years old.
Precisely. So that is what I'm saying.
That's not an emergency.
It is no longer an emergency. We have to look for innovative, sustainable management of refugees.
Yes.
and the obligation. There's what we call soft and hard diplomacy. It's for the country to decide which one it wants. And there is no shying away from the barrage that may come if it is necessary. You cannot compromise the security of the country, the national security, public order, because you have 800,000 refugees in the camp who have no food, who become now a insecurity situation against the security of 51 million Kenyans. So it is for the country to decide. And I'm sure that discussion is ongoing at the top level of the country. And again, involving the organizations, UNHCR included, the top level representatives of the government of America in the country. But it's also incumbent also on Kenyans to know that refugees are humans.
Yes.
Nobody wishes to be a refugee. They find themselves in that situation, and it is for us to welcome. We respect their human dignity, their human rights, and we have been according them all the access and support we can. But the resources are really strained. In terms of land, in terms of security, in terms of water and all this. Refugee hosting areas are SAR areas. Water is a scarcity. And therefore, when we have additional population, it even becomes dire. The World Food Program does not support water. Yeah. So it is for us to rethink long-term strategies. And it is not going to be tomorrow. It must be today. In fact, it should have been yesterday. Because this is something that has been with us. And because this has happened abruptly, just like how it is happening in other trade areas, in relation to humanitarian support and assistance of refugees, the shock therapy that the current American administration has globally extended should also now be a wake-up call for us.
Absolutely.
Yes. Calling it shock therapy. But just for conversation's sake, I mean, if you look at what is happening across the world, America is looking inward and saying, we will block our borders. If you go to the UK as well, they're saying, we are willing to have our people, but first go to Rwanda, then get processed, then come this side. But here we have, as Kenya, we're having over 800,000 people. Perhaps the government, and not just the government of Kenya, but African Union needs to rethink how it's handling its own people and find solutions internally. Although it is said African Union is a toothless dog.
Well, I mean, look, I think there are emergency conversations and then there are emergency actions that need to take place in terms of what's happening now. Like I said, Kenya doesn't want to be the one who diplomatically is blamed for tossing 800,000 people out of its country. But at the same time, what's the rest of the world doing when it comes to making sure that their people are secured first? It's a tough conversation, but it's a necessary one. And we thank you for being here with us to have it this morning. John Burugu is the Commissioner for Refugee Affairs. He's been our guest this hour talking about very important things, and we must keep this discourse front and center. Thank you for being in the hot seat of the Situation Room this morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.